everyone, and welcome to another episode of the In Full Bloom Book Club. Here we utilize the transformative power of storytelling to explore perspectives and to cultivate empathy, compassion, and connection. This season, we are exploring the topic of collective grief and trauma. Our questions are: how does trauma shape us? What consequences of collective trauma are we facing today? And how can we support one another in navigating collective grief? We are currently reading The Collective by Alison Gaylin. Physical and digital purchase options are in the description box below. This episode, we will be covering chapters 1 through 7. So just a heads up, there will be lots of spoilers in this episode. So please go read the chapters and come back to join the discussion. If you enjoy this kind of content and value what we're doing here, you can show your support by liking, commenting, and subscribing below. Okay, so at the beginning of each episode, a host will be giving a quote of the day. And today I'm providing mine. My quote is, "The beauty of uncertainty is infinite possibility." I found it online, and since it's been like my Facebook timeline photo, but I think it's a really beautiful sentiment and has been very helpful to me when I've kind of had a lot of anxiety about the uncertainty of what my future holds, my path holds. So yeah, I hope that resonates with some of y'all and provides you all some peace as well.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and go over the summary of chapters 1 through 7. So, we are introduced to the narrator and main character, Camille, 5 years after the alleged rape and murder of her daughter. Camille attends a ceremony where the alleged murderer will be accepting an award and is arrested after an intoxicated outburst, landing her in jail for disorderly conduct. She is bailed out by her friend Luke, who seems to be the closest person to her at this point in time. She has a special connection to Luke as he is the recipient of her daughter's donated heart. Returning home, she struggles to recover from her viral outbursts, feeling judged, questioned, and hounded by strangers, clients, and friends alike. After a stranger gives her what appears to be a business card with the word Niobe on it, she is invited to join a Facebook group for grieving mothers. She is moved by the stories she hears. She is later sent a link to an extension of the group on the dark web and begins to become quite active on the forum. The anonymous chat features grieving mothers and their detailed and violent fantasies for the murders of their children. In her rage, she posts on the forum that she'd seriously like the violent acts to happen to her daughter's murderer. The group facilitator messages her to confirm that she was speaking seriously, and after getting Camille's promise of commitment, secrecy, and compliance, invites her to join a collective of women avenging the deaths of their murdered children. Shortly after Camille accepts this invitation, she is given her first assignment that includes 7 detailed steps for her to follow. We end the chapter with her taking the final step. All right, y'all, let's get into the nitty-gritty. So, what are our general thoughts? What do we think about this first part?
So I'll start. So a few notes. The first thing that's coming to my mind is that Camille is playing herself and she's playing the readers. I don't know who she's trying to convince that she felt like this was that like a role playing exercise. You're on the dark web, ma'am. That's the first misstep you make. No, I'm joking. But I mean, like, I was just like, why do you think this is a game? Like, what indicated to you that this was not serious? So that was interesting. I also think Camille has a very strong voice in this narrative. She comes off, I guess, her grief and the mind frame she's in currently is very evident in how she speaks about things, even if they're not like related to or not directly related to the murder of her daughter.
I'm very worried for Camille. Just a couple of red flags when someone in the Facebook group was like, everything's okay here. It just automatically gives me cult type of vibes. And then also I took note of in the dark web extension of the Facebook group, Camilla let us know that only the 0001 can communicate with other people. They can't communicate with each other. And it's just already looking like a bad situation is about to get worse.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I was telling Tia off camera, like, I'm already at the point where I'm kind of pissed. I can see where it's just the fact that she's giving, like, I don't know what's going on. I'm oblivious. No, you know what's happening. Like,
You know
how?
exactly what's
And like the way she just like nonchalant, like, oh, I need to get this, whatever she had to download on her computer to get access to the dark web. Who's like, just what normal well, granted, think about it this way, she's not normal right now, she's grieving, she's deep in grief, so honestly her actions, I guess it makes sense in that way because like she's just so deep in it. But yeah, I'm already irritated. But I will say I love, so if you notice in this first part, like there are moments where she's having a conversation with someone but then like she's like trailing off in her thoughts, and I love the way the author wrote that, like how Allison kind of did that, because I don't know, that feels genuine to how we really are when we're like having conversations with people, and sometimes like we're just so feel in our own situation. You know, we're trying to be genuine and trying to like, be in the real world, but like also our mind is just kind of trolling off and doing other things. So I really like the way Allison kind of wrote that into the story as well.
So our first question is a straight out the text question where we explore the words, the voice, the tone. We really dive into the words of the author to understand what they're trying to communicate. Um, yeah. So our first question is on page 37. Our main character refers to the woman who introduced her to Niobe, the online Facebook group, as a guardian angel. She says, the angel tells me over and over in the depths of my imagination, that hiss of a whisper, a snake wrapped around nourishing fruit. Tell your story. You'll feel better. I guarantee that you will. Let's explore these lines and Galen's use of the imagery here. What do they suggest about Camille and her relationship with the group? What do they suggest about her relationship with her grief?
Well, I wrote down a couple things. Um, so immediately I started thinking about the Bible story Adam and Eve for obvious reasons. I I was thinking about how this woman, or at least the way she described it sounds like temptation. And as we know, like the story of Adam and Eve, this forbidden fruit, representing temptation and everything. And I so this part was interesting to me because it felt like a bit of a juxtaposition, being that she's considering that she's calling her a guardian angel, but she's also feeling very tempted. And so that was really interesting, that play right there, and it kind of feels like a foreshadow as well. It's just these seemingly appearing like women who are these avenging angels, and they're out here doing right. It's justice is how they're kind of like justifying what they're doing, but really it's coming from a bit of a darker place than that's presented to us. So yeah, and I'm not sure. The last part of the question was, what does this suggest about her relationship with grief? I'm not really sure, honestly. I think maybe if I had to like take a stab at it, just that she is easily kind of pulled into certain directions. Again, this temptation is just she's seeing these women who understand her experience as the only ones that can kind of cover her, basically. They can protect her. And so I think that makes her very vulnerable. And I mean, if we think about grief, I think grief makes you vulnerable. You at least confront your vulnerability when you're grieving. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, definitely serious, like Bible imagery going on. In terms of what does this specific image tell us about Camille and then how she is relating to the Facebook group, I kind of like what you were saying in the first impressions. Deep down, her conscious, like she knows something is wrong here. How did she know where I was going to be every turn? And she's just like just at the right place. Like I think the whole serpent wrapped around the fruit image is letting her know, like, that's her better judgment. Like something's not right here. Um, And then what does it suggest about her relationship with her grief? Mm, I really want to just say that um, maybe like she's afraid to grieve. Um, just like if I'm thinking about if I saw something I wanted surrounded by a snake, I think that would kind of evoke like fear. So maybe it's saying that she's not really comfortable with grieving or just being vulnerable, and maybe rage is more of a easier route for her to go.
I think it's really interesting that you both picked up on some foreshadowing that I don't think I picked up on. And I'll tell you why. Because to me, it seemed like, in terms of whether this is a quote unquote, in the traditional sense, a bad idea, obviously it is. Like, obviously they seem a little suspicious. They're doing some suspect stuff, like, but when you were talking about Elena, I think it was you who said like 001 is the only one who's able to like
Uh,
speak to them.
yeah,
Okay,
like she has
I
made
got
it so they can't message each other and communicate, but she can message everyone. Like,
yeah, which I'm like, it's possible that maybe they don't know about some of the things that are going on. Maybe it's just like I'm interested in seeing whether corruption within the system will be unveiled. I also the imagery also to me related to like the Garden of Eden, the biblical reference. I related snake to kind of that temptation and the nourishing fruit. Um, to being something that feels like it would be quenching or relieving in some way, which to me suggested that her relationship with her grief is that maybe she hasn't um, really gave herself the opportunity to be vulnerable that way or to grieve properly, whatever that is, or to grieve fully. Um, and if she has so much pent up rage and people are expecting her grief to look differently and to not look like these angry outbursts, she hasn't had an opportunity um, to address her grief in a way that's authentic to her, then it makes sense that it will feel pent up, and that nourishing fruit would seem very tempting.
So we're moving on to question 2. It's a reflection question. Throughout the first 7 chapters, Camille details how others address her grieving. Her descriptions paint the well intentioned onlookers' responses as dismissive, disingenuous, empty, and primarily focused on providing their own comfort rather than Camille's. Some of this discussion can be found on pages 43, 48, 57, and 60. Let's reflect on her observations and compare them to our experiences with society's handling of both individual and collective grief.
So she had one quote that talked about, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but it talked about the fact that like when someone's grieving or when she's grieving, everyone wants to tell her like, go rest, get some sleep, that kind of thing. And she essentially said that people wanted her like out of the way. They didn't want to have to come in contact, didn't want to have to endure her grief. And I mean, I've seen people in the process of grieving and how um, they'll have people who at the beginning, call and are checking in on them, and then that slowly starts to fade, and they're left to deal with their grief because after the first 2 weeks after someone passes, they're not all of a sudden in a better place, but people have moved on with their lives, and I think it can be difficult for people to constantly be reminded of the pain and suffering that exists in this life. um, Death is a really hard topic for a lot of people. It's something that we can certainly depend on. And I think people being reminded of their own mortality, of the mortality of the people they love, is really difficult. I've often been frustrated with kind of people's platitudes about like, um, like she was saying, like they're going to a better place, and just a lot of statements people say that again well intentioned and are meant to comfort. And I'm not trying to negate at all like the truth in some of those things, but sometimes it can just feel like empty statements for the sake of really just saying something. I think people are really uncomfortable with grief. There was also a conversation about, I think she was referring to an old friend of hers who checked in. Camille was referring to this person, I mean, and she said something along the lines of like, those people take comfort in believing that people like me deserve what happened to them because they don't believe like these type of things can happen to them. And I think it's so interesting. I mean, I think whether it be indulging in indulging in the in work, whether it be religiosity, I think there are a lot of ways that people try to cope with mortality and try to cope with, again, the pain and suffering of the world. And I think it's so interesting, because I feel like I've been in that space where it was too difficult for me to process that bad things happen to people all the time. And there was a certain sense of me having to provide an explanation for that happening that still aligns with the view that I'd like to have of the world, that is ultimately just, and that um, good outweighs the bad. In order for you to be able to continue to believe that, there are narratives that you have to make up. So I also really thought that was interesting.
I would say when I was reading, I think it's an excerpt from like, I'm not sure what chapter it's from, but I know it's on page 33 when she talks about when she got back home and she opened up Twitter and finally rewatched the video. She makes a comment that there are people the on Harris's side saying, "Oh, poor thing," and then she was saying how there was also people that were sympathetic to Emily's death, her daughter, and she comments that those are almost worse than the people
Mhm.
twisting the narrative. And I thought that was really insightful. How, like, I kind of think about how when tragedy strikes in real life, how it is kind of like it becomes this certain people who maybe their intentions aren't really in the right place. They're just saying one thing for whatever PR reason. Like, I just never considered how that could make a grieving person feel if um you're just like using some hashtag or like whatever thing it is. It's like, is it really helping them or like consoling them or fixing whatever systemic issue? Or does it make them feel used, as Camille has expressed in that excerpt? Like, that was just really, I never heard anything like that. Someone say like, oh, it was almost worse to see them just like using me as like a poster child.
I wonder if they realize that there is also pain associated um, with them thinking they're doing the right thing, but trying to spread, awareness to certain issues. Because in my head, especially before reading this book and kind of witnessing what Camille was saying about this, in my head, I always thought maybe the grieving families would appreciate that, um, not wanting these tragic things to happen to other families. But I never saw it as something that maybe that was unwarranted or like they didn't want this attention. Well, maybe, I mean, well, maybe a little bit I can see how, you're not asking for this attention. You're just asking for justice or you're just asking to grieve and, you know, move forward in your own privacy, in your own right. And so I don't know. I agree, Elaine. I never saw it that way. But another thing, I feel that this forced me to kind of reflect on how I also interact with those who are grieving. And I know for me personally, I struggle with knowing how to support someone in those moments because ultimately there isn't anything I can do to make it better. I can't bring that person back. There's nothing I really can ever say that will change what happened. But I don't want that person to feel alone. So I'm constantly in this battle of how do I show up for that person in an authentic way without it also just feeling, coming off just wrong. You know, I definitely have maybe said something along the lines of, it'll get better and stuff like that. And reality, like, will it? Like, can you guarantee that? Can I guarantee that someone's grieving will lessen over time or whatever. No, in reality I can. But yeah, I don't know. That was interesting, just me to reflect on how I also interact with someone who is grieving.
Do y'all ever find yourselves, and I'll admit that I think I'm in this space sometimes. Sometimes I find myself, or I worry that I'm more concerned about doing the things that make me feel or make me seem like a good person than actually considering what the person needs. Like, I give the example of, like, have you ever been in that situation where someone's like holding the door open for you, but like you're so far away that at this point they're waiting on you. You're feeling like you have to run to get to the door. And it's like in an effort to, like, in reality, in an effort for them to appear like a, you know, considerate person, like a polite person, y'all both have kind of been inconvenienced in this way, which, I mean, obviously it's not a big deal and we appreciate when people do that for us. But it's like, so is it really about like lessening my burden? Now I'm like running, you know what I mean? And it was just like, it's not that big of a deal for me to open the door for myself. Was it more about that? Or was it like a gesture, a polite gesture to communicate to you? It could have been to communicate to you like someone cares, but it could also be like signaling to other people that we're a good, like, virtuous person.
I definitely get what you're saying, and I thought that was really insightful. Like, in a way, they're trying to show, like, look, I hold doors open for people behind me,
Yeah.
and it's really not. If you're so far away that you have to hurry, get a Charlie horse
Oh,
trying to get
help
to the
me.
door, it's like, it's not. Who is it helping? It's not helping me. It's kind of like what Camille is like expressing. Like, you're telling me all these things, and oh, you need to do this, you need to do that, and she's really expressing like, this is not the way that I want help. And I can't really say that I have heard her say how she would like to be helped, but clearly this Facebook group is resonating with her more than medical attention and medicine and all the other silly stuff. This this dark web Facebook group is like, they're right here on the same page. There is a common aphorism: time heals all wounds. Our main character pushes against this sentiment when talking about the grief of the mothers of the Niobe Facebook group. She says, and here's what I noticed: none of these stories are told in the context of time. The deaths could have happened yesterday or last month or 20 years ago. No one specifies how much time has elapsed since the death of their child, because they all understand that time doesn't matter. Their hurt's the same. The wounds never heal. The details never fade. What is your experience with grief and time? How do you think grief differs from other forms of pain/suffering?
In terms of how grief differs from other forms of pain and suffering, some of the notes I made were the permanency or the finality of it, specifically when we're talking about death. But when you're grieving other things like the end of a relationship or the end of a certain era in your life or things like that, a lot of times that does still have a certain sense of finality to it, um, that I think can be challenging. It's not as temporal. Like, it's not, I'm disappointed here and now in this moment, and or I'm angry with someone here and now in this moment, and one day I won't be angry anymore. You know what I mean? Or one day this particular situation won't affect me in the way that it's affecting me anymore. You know, if they could imagine that they would be less burdened by that than they are in the here and now, would that be comforting? Because if I'm thinking about my mother passing away, for example, the thought of her no longer being here and me being distraught about it is devastating. But also the thought that one day I would be less distraught about my mother not being here is equally, if not more, devastating to me. Because there's a sense of fidelity that we associate with that grieving process. And I hear a lot of people talk about that. And I think it even, I can't think off the top of my head, but I think it was referenced in Camille's story as well. This kind of desire to not like forget, move on. That's what she said. She doesn't really want to move on from what happened to her daughter.
But I think in this specific narrative, grief differs from other forms of pain and suffering because it's not like Emily had a severe peanut allergy reaction. Like, she was going out. She said she would be back, and then someone assaulted her and killed her and left her. So I think, I don't know if it's necessarily reasonable for me to feel like, oh yeah, that will get better with time. Like, I don't know, it just seems like whenever you think about them, you're gonna remember, oh yeah, they're not here because someone decided that, oh, this person's life isn't important. Like, I can take their life. So I definitely understand why Camille is having anger, just seeing that this other family can move on and they took my child from me.
And I know many people who have passed, but like it wasn't too close to me to where it's affected me and the way like it's affecting Camille. Um, so I struggle kind of, I don't know, like reading through this, I had to really put myself in Camille's shoes, and that pain, I couldn't really get myself to that level because how could I? You know, one, I don't have any kids, so I could never understand even just that bond, that level of like what that bond meant to her. But then, like you also mentioned, Elena, there's way, you know, if someone gets sick, that still hurts. That's you're still gonna grieve that. But also when someone's sick, there's especially to whatever degree they're sick, there's a level of like kind of like you're kind of mentally preparing yourself. There's some sort of like I'm spending more time with you, and I'm, you know, we're in this space together and cherishing this time because who knows what's to come of this. But a child or anyone close to you being taken away, you know, unannounced, you didn't see that coming is even more painful. Um, so yeah, I was just like, I couldn't even get myself to even wrap my head fully around that level of grief. And the last part is how do you think grief differs from other forms of like pain and suffering? Well, I think pain and suffering is we experience it more physical. But grief, it's physical, it's mental, it takes over your entire being. Um, Especially depending on again what you're the person and that relationship you have with that person. I think grief um, ultimately alters the way you view the world.
Hey, Tribe. Before you go, we wanted to chat with you about how you can help your fellow humans navigate collective grief and trauma. This season, each host has chosen a charity to share with you all. The charities we've selected have missions that address collective grief or trauma in some way. Our hope is that you'll find a charity whose mission aligns with your hopes for humanity.
You can check the description box for links to our fundraising pages. We encourage you all to explore the websites for information about each organization's impact and ensure you're making an informed decision when giving. InfoBlue Media has no affiliation with any of these charities or crowdfunding platforms. Thank you all for your consideration.
Journey well.